Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank members of this House for the 15 hours of robust debate, which saw 65 members speaking. So normally RUS speech is shorter than the budget speech, but this year may be different. Now, and I also want to thank Mr. Chris D'Souza for his very moving and personal speech of what it means to be a Singaporean. And let me also thank Mr. Liang Yinghua, Chairman of Government Parliamentary Committee for Finance and Trade and Industry, for laying out the big picture and key issues clearly. Mr. Liang spoke about supporting our people through the immediate pain of the crisis and the need to take action to emerge stronger. Importantly, he did not shy away from the difficult conversation of how these important measures need to be funded and offered constructive suggestions. This sets the stage for this House to discuss the way forward. I also thank Ms. Foo Mee Ha, who not only spoke passionately about supporting our people and businesses, but also suggested how to do so in a prudent and sustainable manner. Over the last few days, the passionate debate went along a few threads. Some members elevated the debate to help Singaporeans appreciate the changing landscape and the need to act. Some members highlighted the importance of our reserves, the bold and decisive response mounted, and what it achieved. Unfortunately, some argued selectively without acknowledging the broader impact of COVID-19 and the outcomes of the government's decisive interventions. Before I dive into the issues raised by members, I want to situate Budget 2021 and Singapore's future within the larger forces sweeping the world. Singapore sits at a crossroads between the East and the West. It is a position that we have harnessed to maintain our relevance to the world amid the flux and changing tides of global political and economic developments. But we cannot take our standing in the world for granted. It is something that we have to painstakingly maintain as the world and region evolve so that we remain relevant. For some time, we have observed the gradual geopolitical and technological shifts. The world was slowly adapting to a rising China, which found its place alongside the US as an economic and military powerhouse. Inevitably, there has been some friction. Fortunately, the deep interdependence of markets and supply chains served as a stabilizer for world order, as well as international trade and commerce. But COVID-19 disrupted this tenuous equilibrium and accelerated bifurcation and change. Overnight, the virus revealed the vulnerabilities of interconnected supply chains. The race for vaccines and the rush for economic recovery have also surfaced nationalist tendencies. These events will play a significant part in countries' and businesses' calculations as they rebuild their value chains and business networks. Countries will seek for greater onshoring of their key industries for resilience. Businesses may rethink their globalization strategy and approach, giving more weight to resilience and reliability. Singapore can capitalize on them to emerge stronger, becoming more competitive and remain relevant to the world. First, nations and businesses will place a high premium on partners and locations which are reliable and predictable in their dealings. This is where we can leverage the strong Singapore brand, globally trusted for long-term planning, openness, and reliability. Second, as the flow of people pulled back because of the lockdowns, the flow of digital information and knowledge spiked. There is potential for Singapore to ride on the rise of technology adoption and digital economy. Third, climate change is a threat for humanity. We must do our part, create new opportunities from the global interest in sustainable development. My budget statement laid out our strategic plans to capitalize on our strengths and to double down on our commitment to invest in connectivity, digitalization, and the green economy, and of course, our people. So I'll round up this budget debate by speaking on members' contributions along three themes: our economic strategy to emerge stronger, a cohesive and livable Singapore, and a prudent fiscal strategy for the long term. Last year, I committed close to $100 billion to fight this crisis. Since then, I've heard many views on the appropriateness and adequacy of our economic response. Some have called for more support, while others have asked if we are doing too much. Let me recap the context. COVID-19 has caused the worst global economic crisis since the Great Depression. Globally, real GDP is estimated to have fallen by 3.5% in 2020, equivalent to a drop of close to $5 trillion in economic output. Many countries are experiencing full recessions in 2020. Sectors like aviation and tourism felt the brunt of the impact, with 1 billion fewer international arrivals in 2020, a 74% drop. Labour markets were disrupted on an unprecedented scale, with 8.8% of global working hours lost relative to the fourth quarter of 2019. This is equivalent to 255 million full-time jobs. Economists also warn of possible scarring, with long-term GDP losses, rising public and corporate debt, higher hurdles on capital spending, and continued rise in unemployment levels. We disbursed a total of $27.4 billion in grants to provide relief, preserve jobs, and help firms build capabilities to pivot to new growth areas, more than 18 times the amount disbursed in 2019. As many members, including Mr. Liang Yinghua and Mr. Desmond Chu, thoughtfully reminded us, we narrowly averted a much deeper recession and scarring. Our fiscal and monetary policy measures are estimated to have prevented a further 6.6 percentage point in GDP contraction last year and mitigated the rise in resident unemployment rates by 2 percentage points, or about 155,000 jobs. While our economy contracted sharply in the second quarter of 2020 compared to the fourth quarter of 2019, the rebound over the next 2 quarters recouped about 80% of the output lost. More details of our early findings can be found in the interim assessment of the COVID-19 measures that the Ministry of Finance released earlier this year. The impulses from last year's measures continue to flow through the economy to complement Budget 2021. The combined effects of the 2 years' budgets imply a material support to GDP in 2021. Our calibrated strategy to support businesses and protect livelihoods has seen positive outcomes for firms and workers. We tilted support towards the hardest hit sectors to help them retain core capabilities and prepare for recovery. Today, some of these sectors are starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. For example, with the phased resumption of activities domestically since June 2020, the consumer-facing sectors, including retail and food services, saw a gradual recovery to around 85% of pre-COVID-19 output levels by Q4 in 2020. Many firms have made good use of the support we rolled out. In 2020, $18 billion worth of loans to 21,000 enterprises were supported by Enterprise Singapore's financing schemes. Almost all recipients were micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. Enterprise Singapore also supported more than 15,000 companies in raising productivity, going international, and undertaking innovation projects. This is 54% more than in 2019. So I'm glad that businesses were taking innovation more seriously during this COVID period. And Mindful Movement was one such beneficiary. When COVID-19 struck, the yoga studio halted on-site classes. After consulting in the SME Center, Mindful Movement tapped on the Productivity Solutions grant to transit their classes online. And today, they continue to offer both online and physical classes to provide clients greater choice and flexibility. For sectors that remain badly affected, I will continue to provide targeted relief and support to help them transform and reposition themselves for recovery. On the workers' front, the SG United Jobs and Skills package has helped to cushion the labour market fallout and preserve the livelihoods of Singaporeans. Many job seekers join industries with a promising growth outlook through the Jobs Growth Incentive, or the JGI, and drew the same or higher wages. The Ministry of Manpower will provide more details at the COS. Nearly 76,000 local job seekers were placed in jobs and skills opportunities through the SG United's Jobs and Skills package between April and December last year. Close to 80% of them were placed into jobs. Of this job placement, 6 in 10 were long-term jobs. Growth sectors such as Infocom technology or ICT, healthcare, and manufacturing accounted for most of the placements. We tutor support towards mature job seekers, recognizing the higher hurdles they face with career transitions. Based on preliminary estimates, mature workers aged 40 and above accounted for about half of the first 110,000 JGI beneficiaries and about half of the 76,000 locals placed in SG United Jobs and Skills opportunities. This includes more than 8,000 mature job seekers placed last year on career conversion program like the Tech Skills Accelerator and Professional Conversion Programs, or PCPs. These schemes enable trainees to reskill for jobs with good growth prospects. For example, about 7 in 10 PCPs participants earn higher wages after starting their new jobs. Mr. Goh Chi Yong has been in tourism for close to 24 years, dealing in traditional sales for walk-in customers. He witnessed the digital disruption to the industry. At 55 years young, Chi Yong embarked on the Professional Conversion Program for Digital Sales Executive with Siam Express last March. Although he was still in the same travel industry, moving from traditional to digital sales was not easy. But with the restructured training, he gained confidence. And Chi Yong now applies his newly acquired digital skills in his job and enjoys exploring new ways of packaging holidays for a post-COVID world. We averted a COVID generation of workers and students by preserving human capital and enhancing their employability. Compared to the 2019 cohort, although full-time permanent employment fell by about 10 percentage points, overall employment rates for this year's fresh IHL graduates remained similar to past years. In particular, 94% of autonomous university graduates in 2020 found employment or got into a traineeship within 6 months, compared to 91% in 2019. The SG United Traineeships program has contributed significantly to this outcome. It has placed close to 5,400 recent graduates into traineeships to help them gain useful skills and industry experience and prepare them for the recovery. Some have already landed full-time jobs. Mr. Chen Chia Hao embarked on a traineeship last year with Tiger Singapore, an artificial intelligence or AI startup. Although he had no prior experience in AI or data science, the traineeship enabled Chia Hao to pursue his dream of working in deep tech. He picked up new skills quickly and developed a natural language processing model to perform information extraction. And Tiger was impressed by Chia Hao's strong performance and hired him as a full-time junior software engineer within 6 months of the start of his traineeship. In this budget, I also extended the JGI to September 2021. I hope this encourages more employers to convert trainees to employees in a timely manner. Overall, we have managed to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 on our young. While unemployment rates amongst our young increased by 2 percentage points from September 2019 to September 2020, it remained well below that in EU countries. As you can see from this chart, I would like to thank members, including Dr. Shahira Abdullah, for speaking on the importance of safeguarding the future of our youth. And I assure this House that this remains a key priority. Looking back, the waters of 2020 have been rough, but we have kept our ship intact with all hands on deck, pulling together to navigate it out of the storm. In 2021, our suite of support measures, including the further extension of the JSS to the GSS the SG United Jobs and Skills Package, and targeted support for the worst-hit sectors will continue to provide a stabilizing effect on our economy amid uncertainties and risks in the global economy. Domestically, the pace of border reopening has slowed amid a global surge in COVID-19 cases and the emergence of new virus strains. Nevertheless, the COVID-19 situation within Singapore remains under control. Against this backdrop, the Singapore economic recovery over the course of the year is expected to be gradual and uneven across sectors. Outward-oriented sectors are expected to benefit from the pickup in external demand, while domestic industries improve as activities safely resume. Overall, GDP growth forecast for 2021 is estimated at 4 to 6%. Now is the time to chart our course, position ourselves to catch the winds of opportunity, and sail boldly in a reshaped world. That is the focus of this year's Emerging Stronger budget. I thank Professor Hun Hien Teck for his insightful comments on how this budget has struck a balance between stabilization and transformation. The COVID-19 resilience package continues to provide near-term support to safeguard lives, jobs, supply chains, and core capabilities. At the same time, we are also dedicating substantial fiscal resources towards raising the productive capacity of the economy in the medium to long term. I also applaud our labour movement, led by Secretary General Mr. Ng Chee Meng, for their excellent contributions to this debate. Let me underscore 3 important points from our labour movement. First, as Deputy Secretary General Mr. Heng Chee Hao mentioned, the way forward is as much about being stronger together as it is about emerging stronger. A number of our businesses and workers will hold their own against the best in the world. By the end of the day, we compete as one team Singapore, not worker by worker or enterprise by enterprise. It is the strength of our collective capabilities and connectedness as an economy and as a society that will determine how far we will go. Second, several members, including Deputy Secretary General Dr. Koh Poh Koon, highlighted the synergies between firms and workers. The fortunes of businesses and workers are inextricably linked, more so today than ever. Demand shocks caused by COVID-19 have exacerbated labour market dislocations and skills mismatches. Coupled with the structural shift of shorter technology cycles, it will be increasingly difficult for firms to find candidates with the perfect skills set. So I urge businesses to look beyond hiring just plug-and-play workers and see the potential within job seekers to learn and grow in your firms. I'm glad to see our local banking community leading the way in grooming new fintech talents like Ms. Chu Chui Ling through career conversion. After working in IT audit, Chui Ling enrolled in the Technology and Finance Immersion Program with OCBC Bank. A few months into her attachment, she was converted into a full-time employee. And she now helps to coordinate information risk management for the bank in her role as assistant manager. At the same time, job seekers should keep an open mind, be receptive to new and different job roles, and take the initiative to build new skills. Third, I'm heartened by the labour movement's forward-looking approach on bringing firms and workers together to ride the waves of change and emerge stronger. Technological advancements promise new possibilities as well as challenges. As Mr. Melvin Yong starkly put, every job is at risk. Working from home will also mean working from anywhere. So job competition can come from any corner of the globe with an internet link. For our businesses, while e-commerce opens them to a global pool of customers, it also opens their customers to the global pool of sellers. As Mr. Liang Eng Hua highlighted, our $24 billion action plan over the next 3 years is about pursuing our medium to longer term economic imperatives, even as we tackle the immediate challenges. This seeks to give our workers and businesses a distinct advantage in the global marketplace. We'll build an ecosystem that fosters a virtuous cycle of innovation and knowledge transfer. This includes the $4.4 billion of the ongoing $8.3 billion transformation and growth strategy I announced at the Unity budget last year to deepen enterprise capabilities and upskill workers. Another $19.6 billion of fresh funding will go towards new digitalization measures and enhanced enterprise development support, as well as worker support measures such as the extension of the SG United Jobs and Skills Package to support job seekers in upskilling and accessing employment opportunities. Together, these measures seek to stimulate private investments over a longer horizon and boost the supply-side capacity of the post-COVID economy. This will help Singapore capitalize on a post-COVID economic recovery and emerge stronger. This emerging stronger component of the budget, therefore, has a strong medium-term orientation through an enduring effect on supporting the level of labour productivity in the economy. Members, including Mr. Zulkarnain Abdul Rahim, spoke about what the post-COVID-19 world means for Singapore's economy. To pave the way for our next lap of growth, we must make the following moves. First, we must remake Singapore as a global Asian node of technology, innovation, and enterprise. This requires enhancing our connectivity, including digital connectivity, and positioning our firms and workers at the intersection of key global chains growing out of Asia and ASEAN nations. Second, as Mr. Gan Thiam Poh highlighted, we must shift to a technologically advanced, innovation-driven economy where firms and workers are equipped with the skills to harness technology and intangible assets as a key differentiator. Third, we must invest in economic resilience and sustainability as a source of competitive advantage. Building on previous budgets, Budget 2021 invests in our economic toolkits to support these moves, or as Mr. Sean Huang aptly summarized, to survive, pivot, and develop an edge to seize opportunities of the future. If we get this right, we can set our economy on a path of growth for the next 5 to 10 years. Building a stronger Singapore core is at the heart of our approach, as several members, including Ms. Jessica Tan and Mr. Abdul Samad, rightly noted. The ultimate goal of economic growth is to improve the jobs and lives of Singaporeans. The only way to sustain such improvements is by raising productivity, where firms transform in ways that bring workers along. We build from a position of strength. From 2016 to 2019, labour productivity growth measured in terms of real value added per actual hour worked grew by 2.7% per year, up from 2.2% per year in the preceding 3-year period. Real median income of Singaporeans increased by 3.7% per year, higher than the 3.2% per year growth in the preceding 3-year period. The crisis in 2020 interrupted this progress. Still, real median income of Singaporeans grew 1.5% year-on-year, while unemployment was higher in 2020 than in 2019. Dr. Tang Wu Meng spoke about our $19 billion Research, Innovation and Enterprise 2020 or RIE 2020 plan and its potential returns on investments. RIE is a cornerstone of Singapore's efforts to develop as an innovation-led economy and society with good jobs for Singaporeans. The payoffs from investment in research take time to manifest. We have nevertheless made good progress, and the results are promising. One example is in the biomedical sciences, where Singapore's RIE investments since 2000 have helped to set the foundation for the flourishing sector it is today. Since 2000, the value added of the biomedical manufacturing sector has grown by more than 3 times. Today, the biomedical sector makes up almost 4% of GDP, and 4 of the world's top 10 drugs by global revenue are made in Singapore. We have also established capabilities to develop innovative solutions to national challenges, including managing the pandemic. Our researchers have worked with local companies to develop and manufacture diagnostic test kits, such as the Fortitude 2.0 test kit, and that are now used both locally and in more than 45 countries worldwide. All of this would not have been possible without our sustained investments to build up our RIE capabilities over many years. Members, including Ms. Polly San, have underscored the importance of supporting businesses to emerge stronger. The uneven impact of COVID-19 across industries and enterprises means that each enterprise segment requires different support to recover, grow, and thrive. I agree with Mr. Edward Chia on the need to adopt a differentiated life cycle approach to enterprise development. Our agencies offer a holistic suite of support schemes targeted at the needs of each enterprise segment by sector and growth stage. And we approach it not just at the company level, but at the industry level to achieve value chain transformation. I spoke about the built environment sector coming together to transform decisively across developers, consultants, contractors, and suppliers. And we'll build on our alliances for action to enable more industries to transform together. We'll continue to invest in future engines of growth to create new opportunities for our firms and workers. Dr. Heng Swee Keat and Ms. Cheryl Chan spoke about the importance of nurturing and harnessing the growth of the green economy. This is an important area. The green economy is a key part of the future economy. Making bold investments now will give us a head start and create many good jobs for Singaporeans in future. We'll work with businesses to meet a rising demand for more sustainable products and services. We committed resources to sustainability efforts under our Research, Innovation and Enterprise, or RIE 2020, and will allocate even more for this in the next 5 years. Helping local SMEs expand their potential remains the focus. Most of our workers are employed in SMEs, so the success of SMEs will enable our workers to have better jobs and better pay. Budget 2021 builds on a large existing base of measures to provide significant enhanced support for SMEs to digitalize, innovate, and transform to seize new opportunities. For example, to encourage more local SMEs to embark on transformation efforts and venture abroad, I extended the support levels of the Productivity Solutions Grant, the Enterprise Development Grant, and the Market Readiness Grant until March 2022. And as several MPs and Mr. Mark Che observed, the pandemic has forced many to take on extraordinary digital leap. To help firms confidently take this leap forward, we have also introduced a suite of digitalization support, including the Chief Technology Officer as a Service initiative and the Digital Leaders Program. The Ministry of Communications and Information will announce more details at the COS. We have also provided substantial support to SMEs through last year's budgets. On a per dollar of value added basis, smaller firms receive 3 to 7 times the amount of support given to larger firms in 2020. As I mentioned earlier, we take an ecosystem approach to economic development to support workers and companies across all sectors to reach their full potential. Mr. Leon Pereira pointed to the synergy of having MNCs and SMEs work together. Let me add that this synergy is not just between MNCs and SMEs, but across all companies and sectors, from large local enterprises to SMEs, and even among SMEs. Our economic agencies actively support companies in their efforts to transfer capabilities to upskill our local workers. This includes the PACT scheme to support knowledge transfer and co-innovation activities between large enterprises and their local suppliers, and initiatives on knowledge transfers and skills training, such as the Skills Future Leadership Development Initiative. The Ministry of Trade and Industry will elaborate on this at the COS. I've covered how we will sustain a virtuous ecosystem of innovative and competitive firms that support a vibrant economy. All these efforts serve to create opportunities for our people. To help workers capture these opportunities and enjoy the fruits of growth, We have moved into helping workers get into growth areas and equipping them with skills to secure sustainable livelihoods. Our immediate priority is to build upon the skills and experience that workers have accumulated while breaking down barriers so that they can access new jobs. As Mr. Abdul Samad put it, not just to equip workers with skills today, but also to prepare them for jobs of tomorrow. Mr. Vikram Nair asked about measures to support employment. We'll continue to support our job seekers' career growth through the labour market recovery, including through the extension and recalibration of the SG United Jobs and Skills Package. Mr. Sam Ong was among the 7,200 job seekers who enrolled in the SG United Skills Program last year. He was retrenched from an offshore construction company in the oil and gas industry due to the impact of COVID-19 and the industry downturn. Sam recognized the importance of digital skills amid the future job market and enrolled in the Building and Construction Authority's SG United Skills Diploma in Integrated Digital Delivery. He found the course useful and looks forward to securing a role in a company that will allow him to apply his new skills. To equip workers with industry-relevant skills, we are partnering market leaders to conduct quality training at scale. For example, Google, Boston Consulting Group, and Siemens are partnering Skills Future Singapore to offer SG United mid-career pathway programs in ICT, professional services, and advanced manufacturing. This helps local job seekers adapt to the changing technology trends in a shifting labour market. Our company partners have collectively committed more than 6,000 training places and enrolled more than 2,500 trainees. I'm confident that these efforts will put our workers in a stronger position to seize new opportunities in a recovering economy. Mr. Patrick Tay has highlighted employability and job security as top concerns of workers. These are important and closely interlinked focus areas in our medium-term jobs and skills strategy. The employment landscape is evolving rapidly, with technology being a key driver and enabler. Some jobs are becoming redundant, while new ones are created. Hence, job security is fundamentally about staying employable, rather than staying employed in the same job. We will thus continue to strengthen the skills ecosystem, which comprises workers, businesses, unions, and trade associations, chambers or TACs, and through Skills Future. So let me now touch on efforts to enhance the employability of every worker. First, the efforts of our workers. I'm heartened to see more Singaporeans making good use of our support to take ownership of learning and acquire skills, even in the midst of the pandemic. More than 188,000 Singaporeans used the Skills Future credit in 2000, a 21% increase in participation from 2019. Mr. Melvin Tan is one of them, and after a 23-year-long career in architecture and project management, he switched to the healthcare sector so as to better care for his aging parents. He became a freelance home giver last year to provide home-based caregiving for seniors. When the SG United Skills Program was launched, Melvin decided to enroll in a therapy assistant course at HMI Institute. Using his Skills Future credit, he was fully covered for the subsidized course fee of $500. Melvin is keen to continue his journey in the healthcare industry as a therapy assistant when he completes the course this year, and I wish him all the best. Second, businesses playing their part to enable workers to build skills. Our firms have come on board to make workplace learning a priority. Since 2018, the National Centre of Excellence for Workplace Learning has helped about 180 enterprises per year implement or enhance workplace learning processes. Last year, 3,400 enterprises sent their employees for training in courses supported under the Skills Future Enterprise Credit, and about 250 enterprises benefited from partnerships with Skills Future anchor companies to enhance their employees' skills development and workplace learning capabilities. Deputy Secretary General Dr. Koh Poh Koon highlighted that upskilling and job redesign must come together for pervasive transformation. By redesigning jobs and training workers to take up the new jobs, employers not only help workers stay employed, but also enable the firms to thrive. We'll continue to provide strong support to companies on this front. This includes Operation and Technology Road Mapping, or OTR, that integrates upskilling to achieve longer-term growth strategy. Environmental services company Samways, in partnership with the Building, Timber and Construction Employees Unions and the NTUC Training and Transformation, formed the company training committee and embarked on an OTR process to develop a 5-year business growth strategy to support Singapore's green targets. And to support these transformation efforts, Samways is upskilling its workers in areas such as digital technology. It has also adopted the progressive wage model to ensure sustainable wage increases tied to skills and productivity growth. Third, our unions and TACs can reach out to more firms and promote deeper collaboration between firms and workers. For example, the Singapore Business Federation, or SBF, in partnership with Workforce Singapore, leads the Industry 4.0 Human Capital Initiative to help companies adopt Industry 4.0 through job redesign. To date, close to 70 companies have come on board to potentially uplift more than 1,000 jobs and generate more than $52.5 million in cost savings. SBF aims to scale this to benefit up to 300 companies and 1,500 workers by September 2022. I also thank the labour movement for their tireless efforts in supporting the lifelong employability of workers across different segments with different needs. NTUC's Job Security Council and company training committees are an important innovation for NTUC to partner companies and the government to achieve synergy. By preemptively matching at-risk workers to new employers, the Job Security Council helps workers minimize employment downtime and aids businesses to manage fluctuating manpower needs. I'm heartened to hear that it has successfully placed more than 28,000 workers in new positions last year. Ms. Janet Ang and Mr. Patrick Tay have spoken about the importance of ensuring fair access to employment opportunities for Singaporeans, while remaining open to global talent to complement local capabilities. I agree. I thank members for agreeing that harnessing complementarities among our Singaporean core and the different talent sources is important for us to remain as a vibrant and competitive economy. The Ministry of Manpower will elaborate on this at the COS. As Mr. Henry Kwek mentioned, our TACs can support firms and workers to emerge stronger by helping them to transform in a pervasive and sustained way. Over the past year, I'm encouraged to see TACs rallying the business community together to fight the crisis. The SG Together Enhancing Enterprise Resilience, or STEER Fund, which are enhanced at last year's resilience budget, has matched more than $10 million across 10 industry-led funds to help the business community tackle the challenges arising from COVID-19. Over 2,700 businesses are expected to benefit from these initiatives. This includes a $1 million Singapore Contractors Association Limited, or SCAL, COVID-19 fund, set up to help construction sector firms cope with the increased operational requirements due to COVID-19. Some 500 member SMEs will stand to benefit from this fund. Apart from STEER, the fund has also received contributions from BCA, over 50 SCAL members, and the SBF Foundation Compassion Fund that Ms. Janet Ang spoke about in her speech. The Singapore Malay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or SMCCI, also formed a COVID-19 task force in March last year to support members affected by the crisis. It set up an emergency hotline, organized individual outreach sessions to about 400 members, provided legal advice to those in need, and connected businesses to available government support measures. SMCCI also showcased members who transformed their businesses in the wake of COVID-19 on the specially curated platform, Discussions at The One, so that others can learn from their successes. The SPF has also been working closely with the National Jobs Council and 31 TACs to conduct job matching on a business-to-business level, both within and across sectors. Since the start of the pandemic, SPF has assisted more than 600 companies, and more than 100 workers have been successfully matched to 77 companies. Through this collaboration, our firms and workers can emerge stronger in a post-COVID world. And as you can see, this is a case where really everyone is putting in their efforts and working together. Members like Mr. Lim Biao Chuan spoke about how Singapore has come out relatively unscathed from COVID-19 and how we are starting from solid ground. Looking around the world, beyond the economic impact, we also see broader health and social impacts. 1 year on, some countries have not recovered from the initial wave of the outbreak. Many are still seeing new COVID cases in the thousands each day and repeated cycles of lockdowns. This has wrought havoc on their communities, disrupting livelihoods and day-to-day activities. People are putting the future on hold to focus on surviving this crisis. In December 2020, UNESCO reported that globally, classrooms for nearly 1 in 5 school children were closed. In some countries, healthcare services are still overwhelmed by COVID-19 cases, leaving little help for those with other needs. In Singapore, many of us have resumed our daily activities. Jobs and opportunities to learn new skills remain available. Our young children are back in schools physically and equipped with digital devices for learning. I thank Mr. Louis Ng for showing his appreciation for our teachers in our schools. We're looking forward to the future and are working towards our dreams. Demand for BTO flats remains strong even in these uncertain times. As we heard from Mr. Lim Biao Chuan earlier, people are still looking to buy cars as if there was no recession at all. While we should count our blessings, let us not forget that we are still in the eye of a raging global storm. There are still challenges ahead, and there are still individuals and families who are under stress. Budget 2021 focuses our efforts and resources on emerging stronger. I've shared how we are taking a long-term view and working to support transformation of our economy and workers. But I want to assure members that the government has also been putting in place multiple layers of support, which will continue to provide targeted, customized relief to help Singaporeans differently affected by COVID-19 and the uneven K-shaped recovery. First, we have broad-based permanent schemes to provide strong social support and safety nets that protects all Singaporeans, especially the vulnerable. When the crisis hit, we layered on temporary assistance on top of some of these permanent schemes to provide additional support to vulnerable groups. We also introduced new measures like the solidarity payments and care and support cash to provide quick relief for Singaporeans' day-to-day expenses and with lower income receiving more. Finally, for those whose livelihoods were disrupted, we stepped in to provide some bridging support as they pick themselves up, for example, through the COVID-19 support grant and temporary relief fund. We cushioned the vulnerable against the worst of the crisis and mitigated social inequality. As a result of these efforts, our Gini coefficient of the taxes and transfer is at a record low, as this chart shows. Mr. Pritam Singh pointed out that the divergence between the data and inequality and the lived experience on the ground, quoting a particular report. Now, we are fully aware that there are families who have been deeply impacted by the pandemic, and some more than others. This is exactly why we have tilted our support significantly towards the lower income and vulnerable groups. And government has partnered the community to reach out to those groups during this period. Mr. Singh himself noted that there was, I quote, not insignificant support. So you see, you have to see the support in totality, the full set of support, and not conclude from one sample, because these are rigorous study of what is happening throughout Singapore. Members, including Mr. Patrick Tay, Professor Hun Hien Teck, and Mr. Louis Chua, suggested that we study the viability of an unemployment insurance for workers affected by involuntary unemployment. In the midst of significant disruption, interim bridging support is needed to tide workers over. The COVID-19 recovery grants will support our workers who need more help while they find new jobs or go for training during this period. Longer term, while an unemployment insurance appears attractive, this would not be sustainable without longer-term structures to help our workers bounce back. This sentiment is echoed in other countries like Germany, Sweden, and South Korea, where unemployment insurance schemes are linked to active labour market policy measures which seek to get the affected workers back into a job quickly and avoid skills atrophy. As unemployment insurance would have its complexities, as Professor Hun and Mr. Tay have pointed out, instead, as Mr. Seah Yao Chien said, a job is the best welfare. It is more sustainable to ensure that workers maintain a source of income and to upskill and reskill our workers so that they can bounce back quickly from job disruptions. But at the same time, I recognize that as the global economy goes through an even faster pace of change, the nature of jobs and skills will be changing faster too. We will partner our business leaders, labour movements, and academics to study how to support employability and help those who falter through measures that suit our context. Mr. Gerald Giam claimed that our middle income receive little support for their cost of living. Others, like Ms. Jessica Tan, have raised concerns that the middle income may have been missed in the short-term support measures. Now, I'd like to remind members of this House that the bulk of every budget goes towards uplifting all members of our society, including the broad swath of our middle class. In this budget, I've set aside a total of $42 billion for our social spending and transfers, 35% more than financial year 2019. Now, this is on top of our security spending, which ensures the safety of people and allows property and asset prices to rise over time in line with our economic fundamentals. Our investments in the economy, which ensure that our people have access to good jobs for many years to come. And we have different schemes and components in our support package. Some target those with less means. Others, like the upcoming CDC vouchers, are provided to all, including our middle class. So we should not look at each budget in terms of goodies for me, but whether the totality of spending creates more opportunities for us and our children. I fully understand the aspirations of our middle class earners. It is natural that we want to do better for ourselves each passing year. Like Ms. Janet Ang has said, the Singapore dream is a work in progress. We wish for every future generation to be better off than the last. So let me reiterate the measures that the government has put in place to support this. First, we have quality housing, which is affordable to all Singaporeans. Let me share how we are doing. Even in land-scarce Singapore, you can see in this chart, our housing prices are lower than those of many major international cities, even before accounting for grants. We provide housing subsidies to keep HDB flats affordable. The current income ceiling of $14,000 allows 8 in 10 Singaporeans to buy a subsidized HDB flat. As a result of our housing policies, around 80% of new HDB flat buyers have little or no cash outlay on their mortgage payments, meaning they do not have to come up with cash or little cash for their mortgage payment, and 9 in 10 Singaporean households own their homes. Our homes may not be the largest or the cheapest, but we definitely have well-built, affordable housing options in a safe, secure, and green environment. Next, we have strong support for couples who want to raise a family. Ms. Cheng Li Hui and Ms. Henny So asked for more to be done to support parenthood and first-time parents. Over the years, the government has strengthened support for families with children to defray the cost of education and childcare, through a combination of broad-based grants, subsidies, and tax benefits. Upon the birth of their child, a Singaporean family will receive up to $35,000 in cash and cash-like benefits through the baby bonus and other benefits. This includes a $4,000 MediSave grant, which covers a child's MediShield Life premiums from birth to age 21. Every Singaporean child can also receive over $180,000 in education subsidies by the time he or she turns 16, including preschool subsidies. Even more support is available for those who come from less privileged backgrounds. I thank Minister of State Sun Xueling, Parliamentary Secretary Rahayu Mazam, and other women MPs for speaking on the different ways that the government, businesses, and the community can support women to fulfill their aspirations and help them to better support their families. These include job opportunities, support for their lives, for their jobs and livelihoods, redesigning jobs for more progressive workplaces, encouraging higher technology adoption amongst women, and support for caregiving. These are good points which we can continue to work together. Children also have access to an affordable education, supported by nurturing teachers, which ensures that our children are equipped with important knowledge and skills to perform to the best of their potential. We nurture our students' aspirations and continue to develop multiple pathways to enable our students to learn, including through industry attachments. Third, I assure Mr. Louis Chua that we remain committed to helping all seniors retire with greater peace of mind through the CPF system. The Silver Support Scheme provides support for our seniors who have low incomes during their working years and need additional support in retirement. Over the next 5 years, to help more Singaporeans meet the basic retirement sum, we'll also be providing an additional boost through the matched retirement savings scheme. We're also in a fortunate position where most of our seniors have housing assets which they could use to support their retirement if they choose to. Last but not least, the government provides good and affordable healthcare to all Singaporeans, especially our seniors. We have been investing in our healthcare system to meet the needs of an aging population. We have almost tripled our healthcare spending from $3.9 billion in 2011 to $11.3 billion in FY 2019. This went into expanding healthcare capacity and enhancing healthcare subsidies. We now spend more than twice the amount on patient subsidies than we did 10 years ago, and expect to spend more as our population ages. On average, a Singaporean can expect to receive about $200,000 in government healthcare subsidies throughout their lifetime. As a result, we do well in terms of health outcomes. I thank Dr. Tanya Swam, who has registered her confidence, and I quote, "who has confidence that our healthcare system is robust and can provide adequate care for all citizens," unquote. Indeed, Singapore ranks amongst the top for the World Bank's Human Capital Index, which measures the ability of a child to reach his or her full potential if they have full health and complete high-quality education. We also do well in the Bloomberg Health Efficiency Index, which measures life expectancy as compared to medical spending. In 2019, our average life expectancy at birth was 84.9 years, with health-adjusted life expectancy of 74.5 years. Globally, Singaporeans are expected to live the longest. Ms. Henny So will be glad to know that we have put in strong support for young parents. A young couple buying a HDB flat near their parents could benefit from more than $134,000 in support in this year alone. Besides housing grants, the support includes preschool subsidies to help with the education of their child, healthcare subsidies, and also offsets for expenses through the healthcare support package, through the household support package. So, for example, another example is a multi-generational family that already owns their 5-room HDB flat, supporting a pioneer generation senior with disabilities. The family could receive over $35,000 in support this year in education and healthcare subsidies, including $1,200 from the household support package. And these are over and above the household housing subsidies that the family would have enjoyed when they first bought the flat. Neither family needs to pay their MediShield Life and CareShield Life premium in cash. No one will lose coverage due to inability to pay. So with the most important items in life well taken care of, I hope members like Mr. Leong Man Wai will agree that his position that our support is, I quote, ad hoc, short-term and unpredictable, unquote, is wrong. And in fact, our support is systematic, well-structured and balanced. Singaporeans can be assured that they can always have a home to call their own, that they can expect their children are being well nurtured in a world-class education system, which will prepare them well to take on good jobs and fulfill their potential, that will provide assurance to our seniors over their retirement, and that the healthcare needs of their family will always be well taken care of. Now, it is also natural for us to look out for what is new in every budget. But it is important for all of us to appreciate what is already there and to see the budget in totality over the years. Individual budget measures are useful enhancements which sit on top of our already significant social spending. Over the past decade, we have been gradually tilting the tax and transfer system in favor of lower and middle income groups. On average, lower income citizen households can expect to receive benefits net of taxes of $6,500 per household member in 2021. Members of middle income households can expect to receive $3,500 in 2021. The highest income households instead pay about $9,500 in taxes, net of benefits per household members. Members of this House, Mr. Dara David and Mr. Faisal Manap, have welcomed the salary increase for healthcare workers and have asked for salaries for other frontline workers and sectors to be enhanced. As I said in the budget statement, there are good, meaningful jobs in healthcare for our locals, and it's important to pay them the salary that they deserve, commensurate with the work that they do. This is how we are able to attract and retain locals in the long term, even as other markets compete for our Singaporean talents. As Mr. Satyandi Supaat pointed out, Ms. Hazelpo's conclusion that our workers are worse off due to lower wage share of GDP is wrong. A capital-intensive economy open to investment and trades can have lower wage shares than labor-intensive economies. For example, in the biomedical sector, the wage share of the sector's output is less than 6%, compared to over 60% in the accommodation and food services sector. But workers in the biomedical sector earn more than twice that of the accommodation and food services. So what will improve the lives of our workers are better wages and better prospects, not the aggregate share. What matters more is that the wage growth for our workers is in line with productivity so that it is sustainable. Several members, including Mr. Raj Joshua Thomas and Mr. Muhammad Fahmi Aliman, spoke about the need to continue boosting the incomes of lower wage workers and the progressive wage models. Indeed, there has been some progress. Citizens' real incomes from 2016 to 2019 at the 20th percentile grew at 4.4% per annum, faster than the median at 3.7% per annum. I thank the Labour movement for their strong support for the government's vision of progressive employment, which is shared by many caring Singaporeans. Ms. Foo Mee Ha and Mr. Desmond Chu have also called for more help for our self-employed. We've been studying for some time how best to boost protections and retirement adequacy for this group. The Ministry of Manpower will continue working with the Labour movement and our industry partners through the tripartite mechanism to uplift the incomes of all our low-wage workers and support those in the gig economy. MOM will share more on this at COS. Helping lower-wage workers and self-employed persons is a work in progress. I hope that if some of the new measures lead to a modest increase in costs, caring Singaporeans will agree that this is worth doing for solidarity. Some members like Ms. Ting Pei Ling and Mr. Ip Hon Wing have highlighted another group of concern, our older workers. I thank the NTUC FairPrice for its efforts to support our older workers who wish to remain active in the workforce. As Mr. Seah Kian Peng has shared, this is an example of a company which has fully utilized the reservoir of talent in its mature workforce. To build on this momentum for all sectors, we are pushing ahead with our plans to raise the retirement and re-employment ages in 2022, with the government and the labour movement taking the lead by effecting this in 2021. I thank Deputy Secretary General Mr. Heng Chee Hao for reaffirming the need for this move. NUH is one of the organizations taking the initiative by redesigning jobs, offering flexible working arrangements and training opportunities for the senior workers in collaboration with the Healthcare Services Employees Union. Senior Staff Nurse Madam Batu Mant Dorasamy has been working with NUH for 31 years. She has benefited from NUH's strong support for senior workers. Mr. Agos Salim Sapuan is a security supervisor at NUH. He shared how everything at his job is digitalized now, and is no longer making manual entries in logbooks. I'm sure he has benefited from NUH's many training opportunities. I hope that the government's senior worker support package will encourage more businesses to retain their mature workers and tap on their wealth of experience. Ms. Ng Ling Ling and Mr. Eric Chua have asked the government to do more to encourage the hiring of persons with disabilities or PWDs. Helping every Singaporean achieve their potential is a key priority for us in building an inclusive society. We agree that more can be done, and there are plans in the pipeline. The Ministry for Social and Family Development will share more about this in the coming months. As members have highlighted, there are specific groups of Singaporeans who have been deeply affected by COVID-19 and remain so. We've seen this all over the world. Dr. Wan Rizal spoke on the issue of mental health, Ms. Joan Pereira on the support needed for caregivers, Ms. Rachel Ong and Ms. Nadia Ahmad Samdin spoke on the employment and reintegration of ex-offenders and youth at risk, as well as Mr. Don Wee on families with children with special needs. Ms. Denise Phua and Ms. Carrie Tan spoke yesterday on how the CDCs are partnering social services agencies or SSAs to multiply their reach for the vulnerable in the community. They have also asked to rally the community to help. Now, BlockBox is a good example of partnership. To support seniors with chronic disease management and to address issues of social isolation due to COVID-19, students from NUS and Yale University created a community space and monthly health subscription boxes to track seniors' health and keep them engaged. For the pilot, the team received seed funding from the MOH and sponsorship from the private sector. And this is the spirit of SG Together. But government can only do so much alone. As Ms. Carrie Tan said, we must look into the, I quote, sharing of gain. I'm sure that she'll be glad to hear that we'll continue to push ahead with our plans to develop deeper capabilities in the social sector. I announced last year that we'll partner Tote Board to jointly commit up to $350 million to support the Community Capability Trust over the next 10 years. This will drive capability and capacity building efforts within the social services sector to enhance SSA's ability to serve the community. Like Mr. Seah Kian Peng and Mr. Derek Goh have said, we must do more to bridge the digital divide and grow our digital muscles, especially during COVID-19. We refresh our plans to ensure that no one will be left behind in this digital age. The Seniors Go Digital program equips seniors with digital skills. For low-income and vulnerable families with children or PWDs, MCI's new PC Plus program connects them to broadband access and laptops to support their learning. And who best to be our ambassadors of the digital world than our young people? Under MCCY's and the National Youth Council's Youth Tech program, youth will be deployed to businesses and organizations in diverse sectors, including the community and social sector organizations, to support their digitalization efforts. We also need to boost the digital and technological transformation of the social sector. Good ideas have come from the businesses who are partnering social service agencies to do good and supplement the human touch with the human click. For example, Engineering Good, a non-profit organization, is working with community partners to provide digital access through refurbished laptops and internet connectivity to low-income families, coupled with digital literacies and skills programs as part of its Building Digitally Inclusive Communities project. And this is the spirit of emerging stronger together. Mr. Christopher D'Souza said we need to embrace our multiculturalism and diversity and spoke about what it means to be a Singaporean, regardless of race, language, or religion. And indeed, we are stronger together when we look after one another and build a society that leaves no one behind. At the end of the day, our success is not measured in terms of GDP, but in the society and community we build together. Besides fostering a caring and inclusive community, we must ensure a clean living environment endures for future generations to enjoy. I thank members like Ms. Poli Sant for supporting the government's sustainability plans. I'm glad that Ms. Nadia Ahmad Samdin, one of the youngest members, if not the youngest member of this House, also spoke in support of the Singapore Green Plan 2030. Now, we must not take our environment, whether green or blue, for granted, or for the matter, our reserves. What we have today is a testament to the foresight and hard work put in by many to distinguish Singapore as a city in nature over the years. We made a big effort to improve our sanitation systems and clean up the Singapore River in the 1960s to 1980s. We launched a Green Week in 1990 to encourage an environmentally conscious lifestyle. To improve our air quality, we started encouraging the adoption of cleaner vehicle alternatives as far back as 2001. Climate change and environmental sustainability did not become a priority overnight. We have been protecting our home. Members like Dr. Lim Swee Keat and Mr. Dennis Tan have questioned why government is raising the petrol duty, expecting many drivers can and will switch to electric vehicles or EV before the infrastructure is ready. Now, this is not the case. The petrol duty adjustments are to set price signals and change behavior. Just like how we have made deliberate decisions to protect our environment, we want people to make conscious choices about how to drive, how much to drive, and whether to even drive at all. And EVs are not the only alternatives to driving. Mr. Cheryl Taha has reminded this House that hybrid vehicles are another alternative that are already widely available today. We're also keeping public transport affordable and accessible through rail and bus subsidies and investing in public transport infrastructure. Dr. Lim Swee Keat and Mr. Dennis Tan asked if we are sufficiently prepared for an EV future and on the cost effectiveness of electric cars compared to petrol cars. The Ministry of Transport will elaborate on this at the COS. There will never be a good time to raise petrol duty. Some members, like Ms. Mariam Jaafar and Mr. Darrell David, have pointed out that a petrol duty increase would affect those who drive for work more, like our taxi and private car drivers, and delivery riders using motorcycles. I understand the pressure that they are facing, especially during this COVID situation. So I've questioned the impact for these drivers and riders. We expect to channel almost all of the increase in duty collections in 2021 back to petrol vehicle owners as offsets. On top of the road tax rebates, more support will be provided to those who drive for work through additional petrol duty rebates. Taken together, the support will cover the increase in petrol duty for a year for motorcycles and taxis. Taxi operators and Grab renters have agreed to pass on the road tax rebates to their drivers. Gojek,
will also be introducing additional incentive rebates for their drivers. With this, their drivers will receive rebates starting from next month. Motorcycle owners will receive their additional petrol duty rebates from May. Over 50,000 of our taxi and private hire car drivers will have also benefited from COVID-19 relief measures like the Self-Employed Person Income Relief Scheme and the COVID-19 Driver Relief Fund, which we have just topped up by $133 million. I hope these measures address members like Mr. Chong Ki-Hiong and Ms. Yeo Wan Ling and Mr. Ang Wei Neng's concern over the impact on taxi and private car hire drivers. Our broad-based rebates will not be able to cater to every unique circumstance. They may not reach those in more informal work arrangements. We are working with the labour movement to see how we can provide further help to self-employed delivery workers and limousine drivers. I thank NTUC Secretary General Mr. Ng Chee Meng, our Labour MPs and their team for this partnership. Ultimately, protecting our environment must be our commitment to future generations of Singaporeans. This is just one of the many small but necessary steps in our whole of society, multi-generational efforts to preserve our clean living environment. Let me now turn to members' point on the fiscal strategy. Before I address individual issues, it's important that I reiterate this government's fiscal principles. We abide by the same two core values of our forefathers, prudence and stewardship. First, on prudence. We spend on needs, not wants, and we seek to get the best value out of our spending. We must be prudent because these finite resources are entrusted to us by Singaporeans. Second, on stewardship. In a Unity Budget Roundup in 2020, I said, and I quote, "We have a duty not just to those who make their views known today, but also the young and the future Singaporeans. They are not here today to represent their views because they are not born yet. But we have a responsibility to them, and we have to take decisions which are difficult for us but which will safeguard their interests." Unquote. In other words, we must be responsible stewards. During a time of high economic growth in the 1980s, our leaders managed our fiscal surpluses prudently. Instead of finding ways to spend the surpluses and win popularity, they not only accumulated surpluses, but took the bold steps in 1991 to amend the Constitution to require each term of government to run a balanced budget. This is to ensure that future governments do not make unrealistic promises, dip into our savings unnecessarily, and mortgage the future of our children. They knew the temptation of squandering the easy inheritance would be too great for some to bear. Singapore is in a new phase of development. We cannot expect the same kind of buoyant GDP growth as in the past, as our economy now matures. Our expenditure needs will grow as new needs arise and as our population ages. At the same time, we must continue to invest to build a better Singapore for the future. We are once again confronted with hard choices. We must abide by our core values and keep Singaporeans, now and generations to be born, at the heart of what we do. Many members spoke about building a fair and just society where no one is left behind. This is good, and I share this aspiration, but it is only one half of the conversation. Mr. Liang Eng Hua, Mr. Alex Yam, and Mr. Lim Biao Chuan have reminded this House that just as importantly, we need to consider how to pay for this. We do not have oil gushing out from our ground, and even Saudi Arabia, a country with huge oil reserves, is carefully planning ahead. It introduced a 5% value-added tax from 2018, which it increased to 15% from 1st July 2020. Members of this House must have the will and courage to make the same responsible choices as our forefathers did. We must be upfront that if we want to spend more, we have to raise revenue. First, acknowledge that if we want more social safety nets, it comes with cost. Second, work out sustainable resourcing. Do not make irresponsible promises which burden future generations. If these are recurrent needs, which have to be financed year after year, we must find recurrent revenues, which we can collect year after year. Let me reiterate why the GST rate increase is needed. As Mr. Xiao Chen has rightly pointed out, we have already seen structural increases in our recurrent spending, especially in healthcare. The share of Singaporeans aged 65 and above will increase from 1 in 6 to 1 in 4 by 2030. Seniors are 4 times as likely to be hospitalized compared to younger persons. And each time our seniors are hospitalized, they stay for twice as long. The government heavily subsidizes healthcare at our public healthcare institutions, up to 80%. Even with an efficient healthcare system, we'll need to increase healthcare spending by 30% to meet the needs of our population in 2030. These structural trends are clear. We'll have to spend more. So let me share some data and projections with this House. This chart shows our spending as a percentage of GDP over the past 15 years. Our spending has grown by about 1.5 percentage points of GDP in every 5-year period. How much is 1.5 percentage points of GDP? About $7 billion per year. This is about 2/3 of the current GST revenues. Half of the increase in spending was for social support. We do not have a crystal ball, but let us take a reasonable look at how our spending will change. Let us start with healthcare spending. Our demographic trends will mean higher spending outstripping GDP growth. We estimate that healthcare spending will reach 3% of GDP by 2030. If our healthcare spending grew like those of OECD countries with a similar demographic profile, it will be even higher, 3.5% of GDP by 2030, and this will be 50% more than in 2019. Stripping out the effects of COVID-19, the next chart shows projected spending on healthcare if we took the average of the 2 scenarios. So this means that healthcare spending alone would cause government expenditure to grow by 0.5 percentage points of GDP for the current 5-year period and another 0.3 percentage points for the next 5-year period. To see the impact of the healthcare, so that is a chart that I just mentioned, over 5-year periods. Sorry, the next one. To see the impact of healthcare on government spending, this chart made a simplifying assumption that non-healthcare spending will remain the same as a percentage of GDP. Now, we know this is a simplifying assumption and a very conservative one. First, on security. Threats have not diminished, but are now coming in different forms. Cybersecurity, hybrid, information wars, food security. In Budget 2018, I mentioned that we could expect annual security spending by MINDEF and MHA to rise by 0.2 percentage points of GDP to meet rising threats. Second, other social spending will continue to rise. We are seeing higher spending on preschool education and lifelong learning. Third, as I explained in my budget statements in this year and earlier, we'll see a hum in infrastructure spending to enhance economic competitiveness, build our home, and improve connectivity across the island. Even with borrowing under the Significant Infrastructure Government Loan Act or SINGA, we expect infrastructure spending to remain relatively stable as a percentage of GDP. Mr. Pritam Singh asked that we increase the scrutiny of expenditures and to set up an independent parliamentary budget office to enhance such scrutiny. I'm glad Mr. Singh agrees with the need to be prudent and accountable in our spending. And in fact, it will be very helpful if each time Mr. Singh or his colleagues ask the government to spend more, to give us their estimates of how much it will cost and how they would fund it. But instead, the Workers' Party has called on the government to spend $20 million to set up an independent parliamentary budget office to do this job for them. Even as they call for more scrutiny on government expenditure, we invite them to hold themselves to the same scrutiny. As I've outlined, prudence and stewardship are core values of this government. We hold ourselves to high standards and work hard to ensure that our spending is cost-effective to deliver the best value for money for taxpayers. We have achieved world-leading outcomes while running one of the leanest governments in the world. We are always looking to achieve better outcomes with less, and we will say more about this during MOF's COS. In addition to independent audits by the Auditor General's Office, we also have parliamentary scrutiny of our spending through the Estimates and Public Accounts Committee. The Workers' Party is represented in both of them. Such an office will be a wasteful duplication of these functions. So let us face the hard facts and be prepared to make difficult choices. The government is meeting difficult trade-offs arising from our society's growing spending needs head-on. We have shown that current taxes are insufficient to cover our spending needs. Since 2007, we have already increased various taxes to collect more from those with more means, which are then transferred to our lower income. All this while, over the 14 years, the GST rate has remained unchanged at 7%. We will be in a budget deficit if not for the contribution from reserves in the form of net investment returns contribution, or NIRC. Economic growth alone is not likely to raise enough revenues to meet our needs. The honest but hard conclusion is that we will need to raise more tax revenue. We are not raising the GST rate now as the economy is in the nascent stages of recovery, but we have been giving notice since Budget 2018. The fact is that some of the structural increase in expenditures will hit us sooner rather than later. MOH is already ramping up our public healthcare capacity. Just 2 months ago, the Minister for Health announced that we'll build a new integrated hospital in Bedok North by 2030 to serve the growing population in the East. If we defer this spending, we risk being unable to adequately care for our people when the need comes. Now, some may ask if the projections are accurate, whether we really need to raise additional revenues within this timeline. No projection is perfect. We live in a complex world filled with uncertainties. So we must work within the information available. For example, we could not have projected the biggest disruption of our generation, or that we would have to draw on our past reserves for 2 years in a row. This is a far cry from what Mr. Pritam Singh said in February 2020, and I quote, "The current government has had the privilege of far more budgetary elbow room, both political and fiscal, than any previous government in Singapore's history." Unquote. Unfortunately, instead of elbow rooms, COVID-19 has given governments around the world a very sharp elbow. Ouch, it hurts, and will continue to hurt for some time. Now, I also do not know how Mr. Liew Man Leong could say with such confidence, and I quote, Leong Man Wai, how Mr. Leong Man Wai could say, I'm sorry, let me read that again. I also do not know how Mr. Leong Man Wai could say with such confidence, and I quote, "For the foreseeable future, we do not see any shortage of fiscal revenues," unquote. If Mr. Leong could give me the basis of his projection, I would study it carefully. But if it is his hunch, I hope that as a responsible member of Parliament, he would agree that we cannot be advocating national policy on the basis of personal hunches. My caution to all is this: it will be foolhardy to underestimate the risks and uncertainties we are facing. Let us be honest, focus on the hard work that needs to be done, and don't take the easy way out. That's the way to enable our people to make progress. Several members have expressed worries about the impact of GST rate increase on Singaporeans. I share your concern, as I said before. As Finance Minister, I do not have any joy in raising taxes. I do it because I care for our future. Let me assure members and all Singaporeans that we are committed to helping our people manage the impact. We have set aside $6 billion for an assurance package, which will in effect delay at least 5 years of the GST rate increase for the majority of Singaporean households. Lower-income Singaporeans will receive higher offsets of about 10 years' worth of additional GST expenses incurred. The assurance package is on top of existing benefits and transfers, such as the GST voucher scheme. This keeps our overall taxes and transfer system fair and progressive. In 2020, the top 20% of Singaporean households by income paid 56% of the taxes and received 11% of the benefits, whereas the bottom 20% paid 9% of the taxes and received 27% of the benefits. And we are concerned for the broad middle income. The middle 60% of households paid 35% of taxes while receiving 62% of the benefits, even for the broad middle. Now, several members have asked that we consider other forms of taxes. As I said in my roundup speech at Budget 2018, we continually consider all options. So let me go through them again, but it's a long list. Some members ask if we can do more on wealth taxes. Wealth taxes are not new in Singapore, and we have in fact enhanced the progressivity of wealth-related taxes over the years. I agree that there is scope to further review our wealth taxes. But first, let me address the elephant in the room. Wealth taxes will not replace the need for the GST rate increase. Already, the GST rate increase alone will not yield sufficient revenue to meet our growing healthcare and social spending needs. I'll share briefly our considerations for the suggestions raised. Ms. Fumiha suggested a one-off wealth tax. Argentina did this to fund higher spending for COVID-19 measures. Singapore entered COVID-19 with a strong fiscal position and is fortunate to be able to tap on our past reserves. The impact of the crisis has been uneven. I believe Ms. Fu's intent is for those who came out on top of the crisis to do more for our community, and I share her sentiment. So we will indeed continue to review our wealth taxes. Mr. Leon Pereira suggested raising buyer's stamp duty and additional buyer's stamp duty, or ABSD, for more expensive properties. First, I'm glad that he recognized that this move will not fully cover our higher resourcing needs. Second, I want to correct a misconception. The ABSD is a property market measure, not a revenue-raising one. We calibrate the ABSD carefully to maintain a stable and sustainable property market in Singapore. But I agree that there is a role for property-related taxes. The government will continue to review this to ensure that it remains progressive. Indeed, we made property tax and stamp duty more progressive in Budget 2010, Budget 2013, and Budget 2018. I trust that Mr. Pereira will give his strong support if and when we make such new moves. We have also considered other options, including estate duty. We abolished estate duty in 2008 because the middle and upper income groups were affected disproportionately compared to the wealthy, who were better able to avoid the estate duty through tax planning. So let me reiterate. We do tax wealth, and we have been raising wealth taxes over the years. This is not the question. Rather, the practical question has always been, how to design wealth taxes moves to ensure that they are effective. First, we must ensure that the tax cannot be easily avoided, especially by those with more means. Otherwise, it will not achieve the social equity and fairness that we want. Second, we must balance between progressivity and staying competitive to grow our economy. Singapore must remain attractive to those who work hard and those who invest to create good jobs, because growing the economy is the most sustainable way to generate revenue and raise our standards of living. Third, the move should add to our revenue resilience and adequacy. The government will continue to study wealth tax options, and I look forward to your support. Now, several members have also said that we could rely on other sources of revenues other than taxes. For instance, Mr. Louis Chua cited that the government's total estimated receipts and claimed that the government has far more surpluses than we do for spending. Now, he must know that includes our capital receipts from land sales. So, he's really saying that we should spend our land sales proceeds directly. And Mr. Louis Chua also cited the increase in NIRC in 2021 as one of the reasons we should not be, and I quote, overzealous in strengthening our revenue position. And Mr. Leong Man Wai suggested we spend 100% of the NIRC instead of 60%. So let me address them one by one. First, on using land sale proceeds directly in the budget. We should treat our land as a scarce and finite asset. Selling land does not give the government more resources and should not directly support our expenditure. Instead, we sell the land that we need to sell for urban development and invest the proceeds. This approach generates a sustainable stream of income over the long term and has served us well. If we had decided in the past to spend the proceeds from these land sales, we would not have built up our reserves today and would surely be worse off by now. Relying directly on land sale for fiscal revenue also has two risks. First, land prices can be volatile. You do not want government revenues to fluctuate wildly with property cycles because it creates too much uncertainty for the government to plan long term. Second, even more serious, once the government gets used to relying on land sales to fund spending, the government has a vested interest to keep land prices high or to sell more land. Both options are terrible. And we can see the distortionary effects on the welfare of people in places where local governments rely on land sales for revenue. The current approach of spending the land sales proceeds through the NIRC avoids these pitfalls and allows the government to make land sales decisions based on what is best for the country's development and not because it needs to balance the budget. Next, on NIRC. The NIRC framework smooths the volatility arising from sharp fluctuations in the asset base due to market cycles. This avoids a boom-bust pattern in government spending driven by the volatilities of the market. However, some variation is still to be expected for the NIRC as we update the net asset base and investment income figures over the course of the year. The global financial market remains volatile and uncertain, and how the post-COVID structural changes will affect long-term returns is still being played out. The fact is, NIRC is already the largest single source of our revenue, larger than corporate income tax, personal income tax, or GST. This did not happen by chance or merely because of good fortune. It is a result of years of fiscal discipline and prudence of our founding generations. If they had succumbed to the temptation to spend more, we would not have built up our reserves. And without reserves, we would not have been able to generate this stable and recurrent source of revenue today. Mr. Leong Man Wai's suggestion of using 100% of NIRC is akin to treating our reserves as a gold mountain. If we adopt his suggestion, one day, even this mountain will be eaten up completely, like the saying in Chinese, 坐吃山空. We have a responsibility to future generations. Next, let me talk about the use of debt in our fiscal strategy. Many members have expressed support for borrowing for long-term infrastructure as part of our fiscal strategy. I was happy to hear that Associate Professor James Lim was happy as a clam when he heard that our fiscal strategy reflected a number of elements he had previously outlined. But I announced that we were studying borrowing in 2019, even before he entered Parliament. But I'm glad he shares our views. So perhaps if he reads more of our past budget statements, he'll be even happier. Nevertheless, I must caution against the additional modifications that he has suggested to what is essentially a prudent and restrained use of borrowing. The government's approach to borrowing is a carefully calibrated one. As Ms. Fumiha said, there is good debt and there is bad debt. While we do not borrow, the key difference is what we do with the debt proceeds. The government is currently already borrowing under the Government Securities Act and the Local Treasury Bills Act. But instead of spending the proceeds, we invest them for long-term returns, which is used to repay our debts. The rest goes back into the reserves. Government is going to borrow for major long-term infrastructure. These investments will benefit and generate value over generations, but the upfront costs are hefty. Borrowing is a fair and efficient approach to spread out the lumpy costs to ensure that we better match the timing of the benefits with the timing of spending. If we do not, I will have to raise taxes significantly to fund these major expenditures. And Associate Professor James Lim has asked if we can borrow more to fund soft capital like education. Let me sound a word of caution. We have to refrain from the temptation to borrow for what are essentially recurrent expenditures. In many countries, there is a tendency to expand the scope of what constitutes soft capital beyond the original intentions. So the original intentions were good, but it creeps. So when used to fund increases to government subsidies or social transfer, it is really more recurrent spending. Borrowing continuously for them will just lead to ever higher debts, which have to be repaid by future generations. When borrowing is not used productively, the result has often been high debt, low growth, rather than high growth, low debt. As debt level grows, interest payments can also increase, as Associate Professor James Lim himself pointed out. This can lead to an unsustainable fiscal position and spiraling debt, affecting investor confidence, raising the costs of funding for businesses, and ultimately our long-term growth. In addition, interest rates are low, in fact, ultra low for now, but this may change quickly. When it changes, existing debts would have to be refinanced, and a higher rate could spiral the fiscal situation downward quickly. This usually happens in a crisis when we can least afford it. Borrowing is not a form of revenue. Borrowing gives us cash for liquidity planning, but it does not create free monies for spending. Today's debt is paid for by tomorrow's growth and tomorrow's generation. As I've explained earlier, our fiscal principle is that every government must spend within its means and raise the revenue required to fund its initiatives. Members such as Ms. Fumiha and Dr. Heng Swee Keat have noted we must borrow prudently and sustainably. So let me now also briefly address their queries on the safeguards and how borrowing under SINGA might impact our credit rating. We will set $90 billion as a borrowing limit, and this is sized based on the expected expenditure of major long-term infrastructure projects over the next 15 years. Any increase of this limit will require legislative amendments which is subjected to parliamentary approval. We also put in place other safeguards, such as limits on the interest cost, so that the debt servicing costs will not overburden future generations. This will address Ms. Fu's concerns about rising interest rates. More will be elaborated later when the bill is presented in Parliament later this year. Since the announcement of Singa, credit rating agencies have also published articles affirming Singapore's strong credit standing, attributing it to Singapore's prudent and sustainable fiscal policy. Ms. Liang Eng Hua also asked if we could consider one-off special purpose borrowing for the economic investments under our emerging stronger strategies to help Singapore to emerge stronger. I thank Mr. Liang for his suggestion. As I've explained earlier, borrowing does not give us revenue. Instead, if the economic and fiscal outlook turn out worse than expected, and we have to draw on past reserves for economic investments, borrowing would allow us to keep our reserves invested long-term and earn good returns. Borrowing from the market also means that we have to have the discipline to repay amounts used for these economic investments. The key here is to use debt equitably and sustainably. We'll borrow under Singa to spread out lumpy costs equitably across current and future generations. The government will study Mr. Liang's suggestion of a one-off special purpose borrowing to help us emerge stronger from this long drawn-out crisis. Staying true to our core values of prudence and stewardship, we have built up significant reserves that are now our strategic assets. Our reserves give us the confidence to forge forward, knowing that we have the wherewithal to deal with any crisis that might come our way. We have drawn on our past reserves to deal with two crises so far. $4 billion in 2009 to deal with the global financial crisis, and up to $53.7 billion in 2020 and 2021 to respond decisively to the COVID-19 crisis. Some commentators have questioned if we are dipping into the past reserves too readily. And yet, there are others who downplay the use of reserves, saying that these are small amounts and we can afford to use more of our reserves by spending more through the NIRC. So let me reiterate that this government does not take any decision on the use of reserves lightly. Our reserves serve three important roles. First, they serve as an endowment fund, providing a key stream of revenue to supplement our annual budget through the NIRC. Second, they provide a buffer against shocks and attacks on our financial system. Third, they serve as our bulwark against crises of an extraordinary nature. Due to the strategic importance of our reserves, we have a two-key approach to managing and safeguarding reserves. The elected president serves as a custodian of our reserves. The Constitution vests in the president discretionary powers to withhold her assent to budgets and expenditures proposed by the government that may lead to a draw on past reserves. On this note, I'd like to address a question repeated by Ms. Hazel Poh on whether the President knows the size of the reserves. I've just addressed this in June last year when I rounded up the debates for the Fortitude budget. I shall repeat my answer here. It is public information that under our Constitution, the President has access to information about the size of reserves. Under Article 22F of the Constitution, in the exercise of her functions under the Constitution, the President is entitled to any information regarding the reserves. In addition, on the MOF website, it is already mentioned that the President has full information about the size of the reserves. Ms. Poh also asked about the size of our reserves. Again, it is not in our national interest to disclose the size of the reserves. As Mr. Satyandi Supat explained very well yesterday, Singapore is vulnerable to currency speculation and large capital outflows. Revealing the size of the reserves is akin to laying bare our defense plan and will diminish the value of our reserves as a strategic defense. No responsible leader would do so. So I was very alarmed when I heard Associate Professor James Lim citing theoretical literature that speculation could be stabilizing. I will also point out that there are other academics who recognize that currency markets can be marked by massive instability. It is in fact well acknowledged by most economists today that market-driven short-term flows are and will continue to be fickle and extremely volatile. The episode in 1992, when hedge fund manager George Soros took on the Bank of England by betting against the sterling pound and dramatically destroyed the UK monetary system, is one stark example. To put it simply, foreign exchange speculations have been and will continue to be a threat to economies, especially small, open ones like ours. As an international financial center, portfolio and banking-related flows in Singapore amounted to $294 billion last year, or 63% of our GDP. Just last year, we saw extreme capital flow volatility in global financial markets due to the uncertainties and risk sentiments associated with the pandemic. MAS kept the Singapore dollar nominal exchange rate stable during this period, backed by the full power of our reserves, giving banks and businesses certainty to make decisions under very trying circumstances. I personally saw this during the Asian financial crisis when I was PPS to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Mr. Lee was invited by several countries in the region to share his views, as Singapore was relatively unscathed. I sat in all his meetings. It was very painful to see how speculation and the currency volatilities that these countries face was destroying businesses, big and small, and the lives of men and women in these places. The exchange rate is far more important for a small open economy like ours compared to our neighboring countries. And if our neighboring countries are so badly affected during the Asian crisis, you can imagine the impact on us. The Singapore dollar is one of the most actively traded currencies in the world relative to our GDP, with daily turnover estimated at US $37 billion globally. I repeat, daily turnover estimated at US $37 billion globally, or annual turnover of US $9.5 trillion. Our nominal GDP is just US 350 billion. So you are comparing trillions and billions. Let me share that I was managing director of MAS when the global financial crisis hit the world. Singapore is unique in operating an exchange rate-centered monetary policy. My team and I had to not just be alert to the domino effects of the failures of banks globally, but also the flights of capital and the risk of speculation on the Singapore dollar. If we had been attacked, the businesses in Singapore, big or small, and the lives of our workers would have been severely disrupted. Now, as a board member of MAS, I want to ensure that MAS is able to continue effectively using Singapore's exchange rate to deliver price stability. A very volatile Singapore dollar exchange rate, subject to market fads and bubbles, would not ensure low and stable prices for Singaporeans. In normal times, our nation's reserves also underpin our AAA sovereign rating, credit rating, thus underpinning confidence in our unique exchange rate monetary policy system. So as a practitioner at the front line who tries my best to understand the intricacies of the system, I must caution Associate Professor James Lim. Let us not play with fire. This is about the lives of our people, not theoretical musings. And I urge all members of this House to focus the debates on the merits of the policies and programs and how we can improve the lives of Singaporeans, instead of repeatedly focusing the attention on the size of the reserves or other erroneous claims. We have inherited a strategic asset for the long-term survival and success of Singapore. Protect it, nurture it, and never squander it. Now let me now turn to the global outlook and our next steps. I said in my budget statement that we expect to fund the expenditure for the remainder of this term of government without a further draw on past reserves. But the global outlook is highly uncertain, and we need to think ahead of how we can respond. Professor Hun Tek articulated well the difficult balance Singapore needs to strike, stabilizing the economy to avoid a sharp downturn, but also undertaking and investing in structural policies for transformation. The uncertainty over how quickly the global economy will recover makes this balancing act even more complicated. If we face a prolonged slump, it will be even more necessary for us to transform, but it will also be more challenging to find the required fiscal resources to both stabilize and restructure the economy. Taking the longer-term view, we have to press on with these economic investments, secure the next decade of growth, and emerge stronger. If we hold back these investments, we'll miss the opportunity to restructure, seize new opportunities, and race ahead. If we fail to change and our economic recovery is sluggish, it will have a long tail effect on our jobs and economic vibrancy and affect Singaporeans adversely. It will also further worsen our fiscal situation. So after considering the various options, if the public health and economic situation deteriorate sharply and our fiscal situation turns out to be worse than expected, the government may have to seek the President's approval for the use of past reserves to continue such economic investments so that Singaporeans can emerge stronger. The President has expressed our understanding towards the government's approach and will consider the government's specific proposals should there be a need to draw on past reserves. But if we are to draw on past reserves for the economic investments to emerge stronger, we should do our best to make good on the draw. These investments are expected to yield returns for the economy, which can give a boost to our tight fiscal situation and allow us to make good the amount drawn. As a crisis response to COVID-19, we have drawn from the past reserves an amount equivalent to about 20 years of financial surpluses. It will be a challenge to also make good this amount drawn given the magnitude of the crisis. This is a crisis fund function of the reserves. Nonetheless, we should strive to remain fiscally prudent to build back our reserves gradually. The fiscal situation ahead will be very challenging, but I believe that members agree on several issues. There is scope to do more to take better care of Singaporeans, especially the more vulnerable. With that, we'll need to find the resources to do so. We'll need to consider all available options to raise revenues. We'll continue to review additional options to complement a GST rate increase, but it is not realistic to hope for this to become alternatives to a GST rate increase or to make the GST rate increase unnecessary. Each of the decisions we make or don't make today to tackle the challenges will determine the starting point we give our future generations. We must have the courage to confront the hard issues now and not take the easy way out. We are stewards and must keep faith with our future generations. Doing so will give us the resources to deliver on social, economic, and security priorities to further the welfare of Singaporeans, not just today, but also tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, sir, we inherited a strong Singapore. We are able to enjoy many opportunities and work towards our aspirations because our pioneers were also good stewards with courage. They steered Singapore through many storms. We have strong governance and trusted institutions today. We have built a strong global Singapore brand, and we contribute to the world in our own way. COVID-19 has taught the world that trust is a valuable currency, and there is high premium for long-term planning and reliability. Singapore takes pride in doing this well. First, we plan long-term and act in the best interests of Singapore and our people. Mr. Cheng Sing Yao rightly pointed out that we now have the luxury of choices in dealing with resource constraints precisely because of the foresight of generations before us. Second, we are upfront. We do not shy away from difficult conversations. We explain the difficult decisions as the well-being of Singaporeans are at the heart of what we do. Third, we honor our commitments and hold ourselves to high standards. Where we fall short, we learn and strive to do better. Singaporeans know that they can trust us to lead the country. We trust one another and advance as Singapore together, as one united people. And this is crucial to our success because Singapore is a small island nation in a big turbulent world. We'll continue to work hard to deliver results to Singaporeans and strengthen our valuable reserve of trust and unity. Mr. Speaker, allow me to say a few words in Mandarin before I conclude. 虽然冠病疫情仍在全球蔓延，但我国在保健康、保生计、保企业这几个方面取得不错的进展。今年的预算案为走出疫情做准备，更有针对性的协助企业、员工和弱势群体。冠病疫苗确实给世界各国带来战胜病毒的希望，但疫情巨大的冲击也加快了已经出现的结构性变化。我们接下来要在保未来的工作上加倍努力。我们会继续帮助各领域的企业转型，帮助员工创造更多好的工作，以确保新加坡在后冠病时代能够蓬勃发展。疫情给许多国家带来了严峻的考验，我们也会和世界各国建立互信，加强合作，克服我们共同面对的挑战。我们的储备金让我们有信心向前迈进，因为我们有足够的资源应付可能出现的危机。动用储备金是一项艰难的决定。政府在考虑是否要动用储备金时，一向来都会坚守先辈们未雨绸缪、谨慎理财的原则，确保财政政策可以持续，也兼顾跨代利益和责任。今天刚巧是元宵节，元宵节的意义就在于阖家团圆。一家人团圆是幸福，全体国人团结起来是力量。国人在过去的一年里展现了同舟共济和坚毅向前的精神。在新的一年，我希望国人能秉持这样的精神，群策群力，共同打造一个经济繁荣、富有社区凝聚力的家园。未来瞬息万变，但我坚信，只要我们携手同心，就能突破难关，越战越勇。I'll now conclude in English. COVID-19 has tested the strength, unity, and resolve of countries, socially, economically, and fiscally. Singapore has done relatively well so far. Our society came together as one team Singapore to battle this invisible but deadly enemy. We looked out for one another and we stood united. We protected the livelihoods of Singaporeans amidst immediate economic fallout. Now, our economy is gradually but steadily recovering. We have been careful and prudent in the use of our reserves to protect the lives and livelihoods of our people. There remain huge uncertainties ahead, but we confront these uncertainties, these unknowns together with confidence, knowing that we have built a deep reservoir of trust to meet the challenges head-on. The years ahead will be crucial. We have a narrow window of opportunity to transform our economy and forge ahead as one team Singapore. Singapore did not happen by chance. whether we continue to do well cannot be left to chance. I've laid out our strategy to emerge stronger. The government is committed to put in the investments, but the government cannot do this alone. To succeed, every Singaporean must come together to build the Singapore that we want. Businesses should continually innovate and support their workers through opportunities for training, growth, and progression. Workers should seize the opportunities to upskill and reskill. And within our communities, I urge all Singaporeans to lend a hand to those who need more help. Nation building is hard work, but if we put our hearts, minds, hands together, I'm confident that Singapore will continue to prosper and be a place we are proud to call home. That is why I've given the name Emerging Stronger Together to this year's budget statement. It is about as much as stronger together as it is about emerging stronger. We are in this together. We all need to each play our parts, and we have a clear view of where we are headed. Government, businesses, and the community must come together to overcome our shared challenges. And Singaporeans must care and look out for one another along the way, so that Singapore will emerge stronger together. Thank you.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I have three questions and clarifications for the Deputy Prime Minister. Before I start, can I ask DPM Heng, where did he get the figure of $20 million for a Parliament Budget Office from?
Mr. Singh, I got it from your member who mentioned it. It is in the record.
Can the WP, Mr. Speaker, can I ask that the WP member who made that, who gave that figure, please clarify? Was that figure actually given?
Associate Professor James Lim.
I believe that the information was shared with the ministry in bullet points for my cut, which has not been delivered.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The Committee of Supply debates have not begun. That figure was specific to a cut. I believe the MOF officials had asked MP James Lim to deliver points for, and it should not really be part of this debate. But having said that, that was with regard to, I believe, a fiscal office. That cut hasn't been delivered. Let me carry on with my clarifications and questions. The Parliament Budget Office, or Parliamentary Budget Officer, is not an unusual institution in many parliamentary democracies. It's a new, fairly new institution, and really it is to not help the opposition in Parliament, it is to help all MPs. And this is consonant with the separation of powers schema. Now, I was a member of the Estimates Committee some years ago, and I'll never forget, and those members who, those MPs who are members of the Estimates Committee will also remember, a senior civil servant said, "I cannot be smarter than my boss. I cannot be smarter than my boss." Who's her boss? Her boss is the Minister of Finance. And so a Parliament Budget Office or officer is there to provide independent analysis, to confirm the nature of the budget, to confirm that programs are delivering the outcomes that are desired, as was quite eloquently put by the member for Aljunied, Mr. Leon Pereira, who said it's not just about getting an A for effort, it's about scoring an A for outcomes. And to that end, as I acknowledged in my speech, the NS DPM Heng also shared in his roundup speech, the budget is not about a one-year program, it's about a multi-year program. And in my speech, I asked DPM Heng, for which I don't believe a clarification was forthcoming, about the $24 billion being about the headline $24 billion figure, which is a multi-year initiative. Questions about the accountability of this figure. How are we going to look back at this figure and say that money has been spent prudently? The second point is with regard to the capability transfer program. I believe I had some questions about it, and fundamentally, again, Minister committed it until 2024, I believe, and I had some questions about how many Singaporeans were trained. Minister gave the number less than 970, and my query was whether this was, my query also sought information on how much money was spent on this initiative and whether these outcomes are outcomes that the government is satisfied with. I don't believe that was answered. My third point actually is a carryover from the unity budget. Minister made the point about a remark I had made, elbow room, more fiscal elbow room than any other government. I think that's factually true. More revenues, more expenditure, certainly more expenditure, but certainly more revenues as well for the government to spend and to consider how to lay out its plans. So there's nothing factually inaccurate about that. But I would come to the point of the driver support program or the various programs that the government has laid out for private hire drivers. Now, in the unity budget, I spoke about another community of individuals, private hire bus drivers. And many of them support the tourism sector. I think in this budget, with the JSS being extended to severely hit sectors like aviation, I'm sure the workers in that industry, the companies in that industry appreciate the support. But this group of private hire bus drivers, there was support rendered in the subsequent budgets from the unity budget. The most important, not the most important, one of the most important interventions was to subsidize the cost of parking in HDB estates for these private hire bus drivers. And that was extended to March 2021. Can I ask Minister Heng whether this extension would continue for this group of workers because the tourism industry is decimated? Thank you.
Leader.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker. I did not mean to go before the Deputy Prime Minister responds, but I just wanted to ask or seek a clarification from the Leader of the Opposition, because this may be helpful for either the Deputy Prime Minister's reply or perhaps for later. When he refers to the Parliamentary Budget Office, and I think it was quite clear in his original speech and just now that he indicated that the purpose of this office is to assess outcomes of government expenditure. Can I just clarify if that is the purpose? Question number one. Question number two, is this the same as the Independent Fiscal Council that the other member of the Workers' Party, Mr. James Lim, has filed a cut on?
The independent, I beg your pardon, the Parliament Budget Office that I had shared in my speech in this debate about actually mirrors the Canadian model, the Canadian Parliament Budget Office. Parliament Budget Office, or under the Parliament of Canada Act, I believe it's called Parliament Budget Officer. So the second answer then is, the second question is answered. No, it is not. It is not the same proposal that has not been delivered by Mr. James Lim.
Leader.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition. So there are actually then two proposals. One for a Parliamentary Budget Office and the other for an Independent Fiscal Council. That is correct?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure whether Leader can phrase it that way, because the Independent Fiscal Council, that cut has not been delivered. So there is terminology. I think IMF refers to all these different agencies within Parliament as fiscal councils. but perhaps we should wait for Member James Lim to deliver his cut. Then the clarification would be obvious.
Mr. Speaker, that wasn't really my question. The leader of the opposition is, well, also the leader of the Workers' Party. So I assume he knows what he's talking about, and I assume he knows what his member is going to ask about. So I'm not asking in advance what Associate Professor James Lim is going to say. That, of course, he will do in the Committee of Supply. But I'm just asking, and I'm sure the leader of the opposition must know this, is the office that he's asking to be set up the same thing as what his colleague is going to ask for, or are they both asking for two separate things? That's all I want to know.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the leader that it will be the same thing.
DPM Heng. His response is a bit
Well,
the same.
now that you say it's the same, Mr. Speaker, sir, now that Mr. Pritam Singh said it's the same thing, I'm totally confused because they are very different entities. But before I answer your specific questions, let me repeat what I said right at the beginning of this debate. I said over the last few days, passionate debate went along a few threads. Some members elevated the debate to help Singaporeans appreciate the changing landscape and the need to change. Some members highlighted the importance of our reserves, the bold and decisive response mounted, and what it achieved. Unfortunately, some argued selectively without acknowledging the broader context, broader impact of COVID-19, and the outcomes of the government's decisive interventions. So Mr. Singh said earlier that, we should set up such an office because it is important to examine outcomes. You had an encounter with a Ministry of Finance official who said that, I'm not smarter than my boss. Your arguments are totally convoluted. One does not lead to the other. And first, if your focus is on outcome, may I ask if Mr. Singh and the Workers' Party members have read the interim report which I have put out in the Ministry of Finance website, widely reported in the papers, on what the measures have achieved. There is a reason why I put up the interim report, even though the full effects have not been done. Because I am conscious that we have used a big part of the last year's budget. We have used the past reserves, and that I have a responsibility to account for those outcomes, and I put those outcomes. So you talk about, assessing outcomes. That is our biggest spending, and does the Workers' Party have any comments on that? Because I sat through the debate, I read your transcripts, but no one mentioned about outcome, no one raised a question about, could this have been done better, could it have been done better? So what is the purpose of setting up an office when with information that is publicly available is there for you to ask?
Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this is essentially a question, as I mentioned in my first intervention, about organs of state. You have the Ministry of Finance, you have political office holders who drive the agenda of that ministry, and you have a parliamentary platform where the Parliament Budget Officer sits, or the proposed Parliament Budget Officer will sit. Two different functions, completely independent of what government is saying about the outcomes, because that's an independent perspective, and that's something for Parliament, who is going to approve the budget. And those who are approving the budget ought to have, I think, access to an independent analysis. And that's what the Parliament Budget Officer will give.
Singh himself admitted that you have different names, different nomenclature. So I don't want to prolong this debate, but we have a Committee of Supplies coming up on the Ministry of Finance, and we can debate that. But let me ask for the Workers' Party to be clear about what is it that you're proposing. And second, I'm asking you a very simple question. Has you or any of your WP member scrutinized that interim report and have questions for us? But instead, in talking about outcome, what you have asked us just now, you raised the issue about, what about the capability transfer program MOM is going to do 2024? This is going to be debated in the ministry at the COS for MOM. And you can ask those detailed questions. Then you ask, what about the private hire car drivers and so on? And what, would that be extended? Now, those are details of the scheme. This budget debate is a serious debate about whether our broad direction is correct. And do you have suggestions on how we can do it better? I'm open to your ideas, but I have to say, unfortunately, so far I've heard none.
Mr. Singh.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that when there's a budget debate, it's again part of the rules of debate. When I bring up a subject matter, that's the subject matter I want to talk about. I'm not sure another member has capacity then to ask me about a matter I have not spoken about. So just as a point of order, I think we should make that clear. I mean, these standing orders exist for a reason, I suppose. Insofar as the Minister's answers on capability transfer program, other issues being dealt with in the COS, I can accept those answers. I think I can ask my questions during the COS.
Mr. Louis Chua.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for responding to some of the points I raised in my speech. Just two clarifications, Mr. Speaker. I think the first is basically one where I raised that the government cash surplus from 2011 to 2019, that's about 261 billion, of about 29 billion of cash surplus a year. Now, I understand that TPM mentioned that the land sales revenue would form a key part of it. Based on what I could see, that would be about 138 billion within the same time period, or about 15 billion. So in the spirit of accountability, just so all of us can better understand, where did the balance 14 billion of cash surplus come from? And I understand the need for us to be prudent about the use of land sales, and this is something which I understand, but I think it's not one where we're calling for the use of land sales revenue in its entirety. It is one whereby if you look at the incentives to using land sales revenue, they already exist today, but probably in a different extent. And I think it's also important, I guess, for me to share that. So what I mean is that the incentives for using land sales as a means to increase revenue, I think that's something that is already done indirectly, and so that is already in place, although to a different extent. But I think the broader point I also like to share is that I think in the context of Singapore, I think when it comes to land sales, it is something which I believe is a recurring source of revenue for the government as well. I think that's the first clarification. I think the second is, I think, there's been a lot of talk about our reserves, and I think just now DPM mentioned that it's about 20 years of surplus. Yesterday, a different member shared that we have blown about 10 years worth of savings. And I think earlier today, a separate member also shared that, how long do we need before we can replenish our reserves? So probably it will be helpful for members of this House to understand, after accounting for the additional 11 billion of the draw at the end of FY 2021, where would our reserves be? I mean, we do not need to know absolute number, but where would our reserves be compared to 10 years ago, 5 years ago? And I think that also helps us to understand the context without knowing the absolute amount of the reserves itself.
DPM Heng.
On a technical question that Mr. Louis Chua asked about what constitutes the other big part, well, one bit which, as you have pointed out, is on the land sales, and the other part, the big chunk of it, is the NIRC, and the NIRC is already being used. Now, on your second point about land sales, that there is an incentive for the government to use land sales because the revenues are already done indirectly, that is wrong. I said very clearly that when we do land sales, it is to meet the needs for our people, for our economy. you cannot plan land sales on the basis that we need the revenue, therefore I would have to do that. And once the land sales proceeds, it goes into the past reserves, right? Now, so I totally reject your allegation that the government has an incentive to sell more land in order to generate revenue. If the government had an incentive, I would not have pointed out the problems in many countries. And I've studied this in many countries, where unfortunately, when the government, especially the local government, is so reliant on land sales, that they have a vested interest to keep land prices high because they needed the revenue, and in turn that creates a lot of hardship for people. So our system cannot incentivize. And the URA has long-term plans, 50-year plans, 20-year plans. So the land use planning has been a great strength of Singapore. So I think you should seriously look at what the agencies have been doing, and do not make allegations like this, because I think it will demoralize the many good officers that we have in our planning department, URA, in making sure in our Ministry of National Development that have over the years allowed for so much development in so compact a land. And by the way, one of the areas that I'm hoping that we can do more in our research plan is precisely on urban solutions and sustainability, something which SM Teo started when he was chairman of NRF and which we are continuing. Because that is a constraint for Singapore, and if we can overcome this constraint, we can do better. So it is not for us to sell land in order to do that. So I would like you to take back your allegations that government has an incentive to sell land for that purpose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I would just like to share that I did not make the allegation that, so basically what I was trying to basically get at is that if you look at the context of Singapore, the land sales revenue, I think that is a recurrent source of revenue for the government over a period of time. I am actually not belittling the work of our Ministry of National Development and the good officers of the URA. I think that is something that they have done well in terms of the concept plan, master plan. I think what we are looking at is in terms of the level of cash surplus that the government is generating, understanding where this comes from, because I think on the technical point as well, if the NRIC, that is something that is to be used, then that should not actually form part of the cash surplus if it has already been used.
Made the point in a very indirect way to say that, well, government is doing it indirectly, and I'm glad that you are taking it back to say that this is not, that you are not making that. So I thank you for that clarification. But let me repeat that when land sales government has no incentive to sell land for the purpose of generating revenue. Right? Our reserve protection framework has safeguarded all the assets that we have. You're just converting one asset to another form of asset, and these are guarded.
Mr. Darrow David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a point of clarification for DPM. Earlier in his wrap-up, DPM mentioned the point that I made, which is about nurses and healthcare workers and how I was very supportive of the decision to enhance their salaries and to review their salaries. DPM also made another point beyond that, which is to say that I believe it's not just about salaries. There are other factors that perhaps we could look at in terms of enhancing careers, mid-career conversions, perhaps improving the work-life balance. I even suggested a bit of radical idea like paid holidays or mandatory leave that nurses and healthcare workers need to take to encourage them to step back from the front line. I wonder, DPM didn't quite address this in his address, and I wanted to ask, is this something that the government can actually consider beyond the salaries and the financial aspect of a nursing career? Thank you.
I thank Mr. Darrow David for the question. When the issue of raising the salaries of our nurses and healthcare related workers was raised because as part of this budget approval process, I did speak to Minister Gan Kim Yong, and I asked exactly the same question, and Minister Gan has given me a very good reply, and I'm satisfied with that. So the MOH Committee of Supply is coming up, and I will leave it to my Minister for Health to outline more fully. But let me say that personally, I support what you have said about how we can improve the working conditions and of our nurses. Right? I myself am a big beneficiary of the care of our nurses, and I would like to see improvements, certainly, and career progression for our nurses and related healthcare workers.
Associate Professor James Lim.
I thank DPM for his comprehensive response to a few points that I had raised in my budget speech. Let me just begin by fully agreeing with the principles that he laid out, and I believe that not myself, but also the Workers' Party agrees with the principles of prudence and stewardship. And we also agree that we, of course, do not have oil gushing out of our ground. Now, that said, I think we can potentially have ideas gushing out of our heads, and that is precisely why I made the suggestion about soft infrastructure, and I wonder why Minister Heng remains dismissive of soft capital. The key, I think, is ultimately that we invest what we end up borrowing, and while I agree that we shouldn't allow recurrent expenditures to be lumped into capital, into soft capital, it's easy to allow recurrent expenditures of all forms, like various HQ functions in hard capital projects. The key is that we always evaluate how we define a given project as soft or hard capital and its ultimate investment and repayment potential. Now, I should also clarify another point on the exchange rate.
Are you seeking clarification?
Yes. So the first one, I was hoping for clarification on why he remained dismissive of soft capital. My second point is, again, a clarification. I should be clear, I'm not suggesting a revision in our exchange rate regime. I am questioning whether there is a need to keep reserve information secret, and whether that actually helps or hinders our effort to do so. What I heard DPM Heng share was a lot of reasons why the exchange rate targeting regime is warranted for our country, and I cannot agree more. But I did not hear strong reasons why secrecy over our reserves actually helps in that case. Markets, I think we both acknowledge, can be volatile, but I think they tend toward the truth. And indeed, speculation, as I conceded, can in fact be destabilizing if our exchange rate is disconnected from the fundamentals. So what leaves me to wonder is if Minister Heng is suggesting that our current situation, such secrecy can actually help us to maintain what is an otherwise untenable rate, because I know that the ministry has routinely denied that we manipulate our exchange rate.
If the member can keep the clarification short, please.
Yes, and the ministry has routinely denied that we manipulate our exchange rate, only that we seek stability. And I'll stop there.
DPM Heng.
Mr. Speaker, sir, first, let me say that in parliamentary debates, please do not put words into my mouth. I did not dismiss soft capital. You said that I was dismissive of soft capital. I did not. I said that we have to be careful. I sound a word of caution about soft capital. Precisely because it is soft, it can morph into various shapes. And I had mentioned how very many good schemes started with very good intentions, with very good people, but precisely because it's soft, the shape changes, and over time, everything becomes a capital investment. So that's the first point. Second, so I think there is a role for building all this soft, just as how you can build if we want to talk about whether my notion of partnership working together is soft capital, well, you can say that and say, should we invest a lot of money in that, right? And we have been very careful to see how we can build our society. And in fact, there's a lot of, if you want to use terminology, academic terminologies like this, I mean, there's a lot of soft capital in our neighborhood because people are supporting one another. And we did see soft capital coming up, but that's not the issue. The key issue is this. We have to be very careful with recurrent spending and be outcome focused, which was a point that Mr. Pritam Singh mentioned right at the outset. So let me share my experience as Education Minister. I said in my speech, and in fact I've shown this slide many times, perhaps I should show it again and again until the message gets through. I've shown it many times how Singapore has been ranked so well in the international ranking of students. And I've also shared that in 2018, when the IMF World Bank meeting was held in Bali, President Jim Kim of the World Bank invited Prime Minister to talk about the Human Capital Index. And when I was walking with President Jim Kim to the venue site, I asked him, I said, personally, I'm not terribly comfortable about talking about Singapore being ranked well, because it is not our approach to talk about our ranking. So what is your purpose? And he said something which have never left me. He said, well, actually, my interest in Singapore is not how much you spend, but how well you spend. It's not how much you spend, but how well you spend. And the reason he could say that was that he had done comparisons, the World Bank team has done comparisons of the educational expenditure and the outcomes of the student. And we ranked well, not because we spend the most money, because we actually achieve outcomes. And having been Education Minister for 5 years and visiting so many of our schools, I am convinced that our schools and our teachers have put in the greatest amount of effort, and the fact that we have parents who are so supportive of our kids' education is what allowed our students to do so well. There is no one magic formula, and that you can have a number and say, I like to know whether it's 5%, 10% of GDP, and so on. It doesn't. I've also said in this budget debate, and even in the previous round, about our healthcare outcome. It is the same. It is not what you spend. It is how you spend it and the dedication of the staff. So I'm extremely grateful to our frontline officers, to our teachers and our educators in their various roles in our schools, and which is why, as Education Minister, I talk about every school a good school, because I'm deeply convinced that that is the case. And it's not something that a budget and a theoretical number, can give you the result. So President Jim Kim told me that I hope that Singapore is open to sharing this so that others can learn, because there are countries who will need to raise this, and they are very concerned that they will not have the resources to educate their people better. So it is how we use it. Now, your second question on the exchange rate, let me again state, for the benefit of our currency stability and for the benefit of all these debates around the world about manipulating exchange rate, Singapore does not manipulate our exchange rate. Singapore does not manipulate our exchange rate. We do not manipulate it to secure a competitive advantage, because that is not sustainable. As an economics professor, I think you'll fully understand that. The long-term sustainability for economic competitiveness must come from productivity growth and labor force growth. Our labor force growth is tending towards zero, and so we have to rely on productivity growth, which is why in the next phase of our transformation, you need to focus on technology and innovation-driven growth. So we don't manipulate exchange rate. So what do we do? What is our exchange rate policy centered on? It is not different from other central banks, which is maintained medium-term price stability, so that economic agents, economic players can make decisions on the basis that these are the relative prices that they can make decisions on, that you do not have runaway inflations. And even then, I would say that right now, because of the COVID, there are again new thinking about whether this inflation targeting is the right approach and so on. But as far as Singapore is concerned, we have been maintaining price stability, and that has allowed our economy to have the macroeconomic framework to stay competitive. So your question about our exchange rate regime, I'm glad that you are not saying that we should review our exchange rate regime. That is good. As to your question about why volatility, why the secrecy, I don't wish to hold up this whole forum. I devoted more than 2 pages of my reply to you on that, about the size of currency trading, about my experience in MAS during the global financial crisis, about my experience when I was accompanying Mr. Lee Kuan Yew to the countries which were so badly hit by the Asian financial crisis. So please have a care, and that policy making cannot be theoretical musings.
Mr. Sitoe Ipin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to add on to a point that the Honourable Member, Professor James Lim, had raised, because I know he's very gung-ho on borrowing. He's entitled to his views. But I just want to add, in life, when you want to borrow, it doesn't automatically mean people want to lend you. In the case of Singapore, we will be able to issue debt papers if we want. But that is because of the huge reserves that we have accumulated over the last 55 years. I'd like to raise a question to DPM Heng. DPM Heng did not say so, but I'm trying to read into his mind, and I apologize if I got it wrong. I think one of the reasons we are quite comfortable to borrow now, amid fairly large reserves behind us, is because we are quietly confident that in the long term, our rate of return from our reserves is going to exceed the cost of borrowing. Because when the government of the Republic of Singapore goes out to borrow, there is a premium. The cost of debt is significantly lower than others. So am I right about my assumption? And Mr. Speaker, I know you're going to ask me to sit down, but please allow me to share a story, 30 seconds. I want to share a story with the House.
15 seconds, thank you.
30 seconds. I had a conversation with our retired MP, Mr. Chandra Das, not too long ago. I don't think he will mind me mentioning his name. And Mr. Das worked with Dr. Goh Keng Swee in the 60s and 70s. So I asked Mr. Das, during your time, did you go out to borrow? And he said, once, only once, but for a different reason. And that was because Dr. Goh saw a project. He wasn't entirely convinced that it was feasible, and he gave instructions to the staff, go out to an external third-party financial institution and get a second opinion and see whether they lend us. So that was how careful we have been in the past and even today.
It's more than 30 seconds.
Okay, and that is why when we issue that, the international financial world is willing to take it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Thank you for your indulgence.
I thank Mr. Sitoe Ipin for his question. So first, let me say that, and for sharing the story. Now, why are we borrowing at this point? Now, there are several reasons, and of which you touch on 2 of them. One is that for our Singa bond, which is about borrowing for our infrastructure, the significant national infrastructure, we are borrowing because we are now coming to another hump in our development expenditure. In the early years, did we borrow? Yes, we did borrow when we were building the first MRT and our airports. And again, that was another big hump. So the nature of infrastructure project is such that you need to build it over the next 2-3 years, but the benefits of that project should last us several generations. So therefore, how we spread out the borrowing, first, in order to, do we build or do we not build? Just because we do not have the resources to build it now, do we forego it? So we must borrow it, we must build it only if it gives you an economic or social return. And the projects that we did for our MRT lines, for our airport, give us both the economic and social returns, and therefore we can justify why we are doing it. But at the same time, I mentioned that in the coming years, first of all, even if our fiscal situation was good, it may not even be enough for us to fund that lumpy investment. So lumpy investments need to be spread out over time. Then the next question is, how do I fund it? Well, there are several ways. One is that, could you go and use a past reserve for that? It's not, because the reserves are used for extraordinary and temporary situation. It's spelled out in our constitution. So why are we borrowing? Well, I mentioned before that there are several reasons. One, that it is fair, because for intergenerational equity, you spread out the cost of borrowing because various generations are going to benefit from that. Second, at this point, it is efficient because interest rates are very low and ultra low. And to your observation as to whether, therefore, we should not touch our reserves and liquidate our assets to borrow, you are a good investor.
Time is also not limited, so I won't borrow any more time. Otherwise, we won't finish on time next week. I'll wrap it up. The question is that Parliament approves the financial policy of the government for the financial year 1st April 2021 to 31st March 2022. As many as are of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. We have completed the debate on the budget statement. We're now going into the Committee of Supply to debate estimates. I've revised the commencement time of the Committee of Supply to start immediately. With the change in commencement time, the revised guillotine time for Head U, Prime Minister's Office, is 8 p.m., which includes a tea break. Members are to note that the proceedings in the Committee of Supply will be taken till 9:30 p.m. for today. Honourable members will be notified of the revised conclusion times for the subsequent heads of expenditure.
Item 2, the Committee of Supply to consider the estimates for the financial year 1st April 2021 to 31st March 2022.
Main and development estimates of expenditure of Singapore for the financial year 1st April 2021 to 31st March 2022, contained in Paper Command 5 of 2021. For convenience, I shall take the totals for each head of expenditure in the main and development estimates as they appear in the last columns of the schedules of the estimated expenditure under the main and development estimates outlays for FY 2021 on pages 6 and 7 respectively of the command paper. A total of 569 amendments to the estimates of expenditure have been submitted this year. The guillotine times to the discussion of the heads of expenditure under Standing Order 92.7a have taken into consideration the earlier commencement time of a sitting, the reduction of question time, and the extension of sitting times of the Committee of Supply for each allotted day. I must remind honourable members that the total time for discussion of each head of expenditure includes the replies from the front bench. With the assistance of the digital timer in the chamber, I trust that honourable members will be able to keep to the speech times indicated against their amendments. I would urge honourable members, both from the back and front benches, to adhere to their time limits, as I will be stringent in my timekeeping. I shall deal first with the heads of expenditure in respect of which amendments stand on the order paper supplement, Head U, Prime Minister's Office. Ms. Tin Pei Ling.
Chairman, do I take both cards or